How to create a financial model from scratch for your startup that will attract investors. I repeat, how do you create a financial model from scratch for your startup that's going to attract investors? One of the challenges that I see, and I'm recording this video because I was just working with a founder, a CEO, is that sometimes you go in and your projections are too low. And depending on the type of investor, they're going to say, yeah, there's not enough. This business isn't going to be big enough. If you go in with projections that are too low, you might lose out on the investors that want to see a high growth, hyper growth business, startup investors, especially venture capital. But then if your projections are too high or they seem outlandish or unrealistic, then you're not going to be taken seriously. So how do you actually, go about this? And I'm going to walk you through a methodology here that I use to get the process going so that I can at least test my own financial assumptions and figure out, is this a business even worth raising money for, is what it comes down to. And believe me, sometimes I've crunched the numbers and realized, you know what? This isn't really a startup, or it's a worthy startup to put my energy into. Maybe it could be just a great small business, but it's just not going to work. So let's talk about this here. Let's, for this example, walk you through and say you're going to raise 500K pre-seed, right? You're starting from scratch. And then let's say you're going to raise 2 million seed. And then from there, you're going to do an A round of, let's say, 10 million. Okay. This isn't a huge startup. This isn't massive, but it's going to be pretty substantial. And you may scale up depending, like you may do 2 million seed and may raise 20 million, the next round, right? So the A round could be bigger. I don't know, but I'm just working with some average numbers and numbers that I'm personally comfortable with. I don't like to raise more capital, than I need, depending on the startup. All right. So this is the starting preposition. If you're raising that type of money, your startup better be on track to be a unicorn or get acquired right before it's going to go unicorn. And what's a unicorn? Well, a unicorn now this is what it used to be, and the market's changing quite a bit, but let's just work with, the classic definitions of unicorn. A unicorn is a company that is worth 1 billion value, pre-IPO, which means in a high-tech software-driven startup, you're doing 100 million, okay, a year in revenue. Okay, so you basically get a 10x multiplier. Now, obviously, certain startups are valued a lot more, and certain startups, depending on the industry, everything like that, are valued at less. But I'm just going to say 100 million a year, 10x revenue is going to be $1 billion. And you know what? Even if you're not, say you're valued at 500 million, I'm not going to complain. $100 million a year, if the financials are right, that's going to be pretty good. So you've got $100 million a year if you're raising this type of money. All right. So track it with me so far. So then what do we do next? Well, you want to look at your business model. Let's say for this purpose that you've got a consumer-driven app, and you want to be thinking through how much money can you make per customer every year and extrapolate from that. You may be thinking, well, Ed, I may be changing my business model, making money. How do you know? You have to start somewhere, and you have to sort of make an assumption that this is the one business maneuver that we're going to make. And you want to start there because remember, you're building a model to test your assumptions and how it works. And you want to figure out how you're going to $100 million in 5 years. All right. This is the thought exercise. I'm not going to hold you to it. Don't worry. Don't get stressed out. This is the thought exercise as you run these different scenarios. So let's imagine, going back to my scenario, I need to make $100 million by year 5. Okay. 100 million by year 5. And let's say that I've got an app and I'm going to be making $10 a year from all my customers. That's where my app is going to go. So it's consumer facing app. And obviously metrics change if you got a SaaS or, what have you, but it's going to be $10 per customer per year. Well, then if I want to be making $100 million a year, how many customers do I need? Well, I need 10 million users on my app by year 5. All right. 10 million users by year 5 paying you $10 a year makes $100 million. Great. Really good, solid, business. Now, I'm not going to get into, well, how many free users do you need depending on your business model, all this stuff. I'm talking paid users. And is it a $10 a year app? Who knows? This is just a fantasy. This is just a setup. Adjust it for your numbers and what you're going to be building as far as your business model is concerned. So then if I'm going to be doing 10 million users per year by year 5, well, then what do I need to be doing in year 1, year 2, 3, 4, 5? And wow, 5 years is pretty fast. Actually, that's pretty much how fast you have to get to, at least on there. Not to say every startup gets there, but the ones that do get there end up then spending the next 5 years building a huge war chest and then going, public and exiting, right? Or they get bought in year 5, who knows? And it's all conjecture at this moment in time, but this is the thought leadership exercise to get you there. So I'm going year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what does my growth have to be in each of those years? Especially if I'm getting to 10 million here. So what is it? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. All right. Let's just do that for, giggles here. Okay. And just basically say, okay, year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. If we're just on a linear growth, I'm going to be 2 million users here. I'm going to be 4 million users here, 6 million users here. Okay. 8 million users here and 10 million users in year 5. Okay. I'm just going to put that over there. All right. 10 million users. Now, if that's the case, what activities do I need to pull off to get to 2 million users? And you may be thinking, whoa, Ed, 2 million users in the first year, that's a lot. Okay. Now remember, hyper growth. This is what VCs want to see. Let's stop and pause for a moment and talk about the type of investor that you are looking for when you're talking startups. VCs need to see you go unicorn, because think about it. They've got a portfolio. 90% of their investments are going to fail. They're not going to make any money, maybe break even if you're lucky, but 90% are going to fail. They're not going to reach unicorn status. And so they need the one investment they chunked in an early stage, 2 million, or let's say they got in at 5 million. They need that to go 50x is really what they need. So you have to be the hyper growth. So it goes without saying that you pretty much have to make sure that you've got the traction before you start, raising that money. Right. And so you need all this data to understand your business model and can you pull it off? So that's the first thing investors are going to look at. They're going to say, okay, if you're charging $10 a year for your app to get to $100 million, you need 10 million users. Do I think this is the team to pull it off? Do they have enough traction, data, domain expertise, the technical knowledge, capability? Is it in the right market? And that brings me to the next thing. If 10 million users is what you have by year 5, and I look at your TAM, total addressable market, and it's only 20 million users total because you're in some niche or something like that. And I think to myself, wait a second, 10 million users, and you have to penetrate 50% of that market. Well, you better have some real magical unicorn dust flying around like a pot of gold at the end of this rainbow, baby unicorn in a rocket ship ready to, blast off. Because 50% market penetration, that's a monopoly, right? And so that might not be realistic. But I was talking to a previous founder just before this call, and she was telling me, the CEO was telling me that would be we calculate 385,000 customers is what she would need to be making $100 million a year. And I said, how much of that marketing? She said, 5%. I said, that's actually really good. So the story for the investors is if we hit 5% of the market, we execute 5% of the market, we're making $100 million a year. That's a solid business. So that's what you want to be thinking about when you're looking through your numbers. Now, it's not to say you won't hit exponential growth, right? So here's the interesting thing that you might be looking at here. So let's look at another scenario just so that, I don't leave anybody out. But in the first year, you might be, let's say 100K users and then 1 million users, right? And then you go and you double every year, or let's say you go 2 million users, then 6 million users, and then 10 million users or something like that, right? Who knows what that looks like, but you're going to have to figure that out and make some projections. Obviously, this is all in the future. You never know what's going to happen, but you have to be planning and you have to take your best educated guess on what that's going to look like. So then you've got these numbers there and you want to be figuring out, what do I need to make these growth metrics work to hit my growth milestones? And so this is the stuff you want to be thinking about. Let me pull out another handy little color here. Okay, so right now, these are revenue projections. Okay, revenue projections, which is great. But that's just not enough. You can't just go to an investor and say, we plan to be making $100 million a year 5, trust me. That's just not going to work, right? So here's the next thing. So here are the factors that you want to be putting in your financial model, okay? You want to be looking at your cost of goods sold, right? For every one of those users, what's the cost going to cost as far as infrastructure, all that stuff, right? Maybe you're in manufacturing and you have to be figuring out, like, this is all your overhead. In other words, you're manufacturing and everything costs a certain amount of hard materials or different things. You're going to be thinking, for every unit that I sell, for every dollar that I make, what's my cost of goods sold on that? And believe me, there's lots of research out there to help you with these things. Then you want to be thinking next, margins. Okay. What are my gross margins? Right? Like, that's what you need for profitability and scalability, because margin is what creates profit, but then margin is also what gives you money to reinvest in your business so you can continue to scale and continue to grow, which will affect your cash flow and all that stuff, which we'll talk about in a minute. Next, customer acquisition costs, right? Okay. So you've already figured out the lifetime value of a customer is $10, right? That's what you're believing in. That's what you're projecting. Now, you may need more. This is 10 million customers who paid you $10 for that whole year. What if you're charging like $1 per month and they drop off, month 6? Those are things that you have to be thinking about. But, your lifetime value of the customer for the year, for that year, okay, lifetime value can extend, but for that year is $10. Okay, that's the revenue you're generating. Okay, lifetime value might be a little misleading, but that's how I think about it. So now you're thinking cost of acquisition, customer acquisition cost. So if it costs me $10 to get one customer is going to pay me $10, well, yeah, then I'm dead in the water, right? So you want to be thinking, okay, how much do I have to spend to get that one customer? And it's a moving target, obviously, of course, but you're believing that you're going to get more efficient as the years go along, etc. Next, okay, is burn. And then that leads to cash flow. So in your financial projections, you have to figure out, all right, what do I need to spend? Do I need to front load with an engineering team and, do all this stuff and buy licenses and patents and go through all this rigmarole? So I'm going to be burning a lot of cash up front. Therefore, my cash flow analysis tells me I'm going to have to put a lot of money in the bank, right? And I'm going to raise more money up front. This all informs our decision how much money we're going to raise, right? And then finally, over here is risk. So then you look at all that and go, okay, I've got a whole bunch of assumptions that things are going to stay the same, but what if this cost changes? What if suddenly, we're getting taxed or etc.? You need to factor that in. So now you have to put in a little bit of contingency in your business and say, all right, just in case, something happens, rainy day, inflation, all that stuff. And you're thinking to yourself, gosh, Ed, this is a lot of work. Yeah, it is. Welcome to being a CEO of a startup. Because once you get a serious investor, they are going to crawl up every nook and cranny of your financial model and make sure you know what you're talking about. It's what we call the idea maze, which includes financial modeling. So what about this? What if this cost comes up? What if Amazon Web Services suddenly starts charging double, or this company goes out of business? What are you going to do? And you have to factor in all that stuff. And your best answer would be, well, we're going to be making so much money, profitability, we're going to be saving it. It's going to go in for a rainy day slush fund with some money in the war chest, all that good stuff. Okay. And so the more you can show that path to profitability, and you can factor in those X factors, those unknowns, and you're mitigating risk and you're addressing that, the easier it's going to be for you to have conversations with investors who will take you to task. If you look like you don't know anything about finances and you don't know the lingo, then guess what? Like, you don't know what taxes you're going to pay. You don't know the contribution. Like, up here, we got in Canada, Canadian pension and unemployment insurance and all that stuff. If you don't know those factors, insurance, all that stuff, processing fees, if you don't know these things, nobody's going to take you serious. So the investors will take you to task and push you and push you and push you to have that figured out, because they want you to know, they want to know you've got the financial savvy to be trusted with their money. You don't have to be right. These are projections. We're wrong all the time. In fact, investors always think you're going to be wrong the first time anyway. But at least you know how to adjust your financial model. All the best CEOs are constantly looking at their financial model and they're jigging things around, things like that. And by the way, pro tip, best thing you want is you want an accountant or a bookkeeper who's going to give you a cash flow analysis every month. And they're pretty detailed about it in terms of what's money coming in, coming out. And you just get that line, money in, money out, how much money we got left, and a projection of burn. That's what you want to be looking at monthly, at least monthly, on a weekly basis when I report to my board, right? You don't have to get dragged down by all these other things, but you want to be looking at top line and you want to be making sure that those main metrics, your dashboard, nothing's beeping red and flashing red warning. That's what you want to do. Okay. A little pro tip there. As a CEO, you're always going to be looking at financial model, because you got two jobs as CEO. Okay. Job number one, don't run out of money. Job number two, don't run out of money. Okay. Third one is to lead the people who manage the systems that run the organization. But that's a conversation down in the future when you start growing. So that's, how it works. So let's get back to this. So once you look at, your numbers and you go, okay, now I need to know cost of goods sold, my margins, customer acquisition costs, etc. Then you're going to run into a situation where you're going to be like, oops, I don't have this data. Wait a second here. For example, customer acquisition costs. Maybe you're like, I don't know how much it costs to get a customer. Well, then you're most likely not ready to get money, to raise money for your startup. If you don't have that data, how do you know? How does the investor know that, you're way off on your numbers, etc.? And that's the reason that, when you've got use of funds and someone just says, oh, I'm just going to plug in $10,000 in a LinkedIn or $50,000 in Facebook ads. How did you make that decision? Do you have the data to tell us what that actually costs you? Or are you just saying, you know what? I got a quote from an agency and they said, I need $5,000 a month. So I'm allocating $60,000 and they're going to help me get there. Doesn't work that way. That's the reason you want to be running tight experiments and you want to understand down to the dollar the best you can. And that's where a lot of founders are great at raising money, because they can say, for every dollar we put into marketing, customer acquisition, we make $1.40, right? If they can get that and prove those numbers, on top of that, prove that with an NPS score. So every time we put in $1, we make $1.40 because they refer, 80% of people refer. And then out of the 80%, 10% actually become paying customers. That type of conversation, that's what you have to be able to have with the investors. So you might as well start getting yourself familiar with how to have that conversation now. So all these factors come into play. So if you do not have the data to help you make an informed decision, okay, if you need the data, go get it. Figure out what experiments you can run, and you may not have the full budget, but you may not have tens of thousands of dollars, but can you spend $100 and at least go, okay, now if I did this 100 times over, it's $10,000, and this is what I would expect, with efficiencies and bulk buying, or something along those lines. Go get it figured out, because that's the type of conversation investors really like. So imagine you're talking with an investor and they say, well, what's your customer acquisition cost, et cetera? And you haven't had the budget to go spend tens of thousands of dollars. Say, what we did is we ran multiple experiments for $100 a piece. So we ran 10 experiments, and here's what we found out. And then what we did is we bumped that up. And so we, 10x down. Okay. We doubled down. We put $200, and then we got to a place where we're putting $1,000, and we found a predictable path. So how much money have you spent? $2,000. Right? And that is what investors want to know, because then it's the same thing. If you can manage that in little sums, think about what you're going to be able to do when you got $10,000, $100,000, $1 million to put in a customer acquisition. Well, if you've been able to figure that out on a micro level, the macro is going to be much easier. But if you don't have figured out micro level, we're all going to worry that you're going to blow it on the macro level. Millions of dollars get poured down the drain. So unfortunately, that's where I know a lot of founders end up shooting themselves in the foot, because they haven't really managed with those mini experiments to figure out how to get their customer acquisition costs down. Then on top of which, you want to be figuring out, all right, well, if I spend that and I get a customer, I got my cost of goods sold, what's my margin? And I calculate it together. And then how much cash am I going to burn, cash flow? And then the cash flow, you want to raise enough money so that you cover your cash flow needs. So you're not sitting there, because you're not going to be able to pay staff if you're at a negative $100,000 a month in cash flow, right? As you're building towards this goal. And it's acceptable, right? You're not going to make money for the first little while. A lot of startups don't make money for the first little while, but they want to see the growth and get to that point. So if you've got, let's just do some simple math here. All right. If you've got in the first year, okay, 100K, okay, burn, and let's say you make no money, zero revenue. Let's just say you're just one of these startups that you're just going to make zero revenue. Okay. Hopefully you're not, but 12 months. Okay. But times 100K, what is that? 1.2 million. Okay. Then on top of which, you want to say, all right, typically you want to raise for about 18 months. Don't tell investors you're raising to manage runway, but to get to the milestone. So 18 months. Okay. I need to raise $1.8 million. All right. Now, this story is I'm making no revenue in 18 months. Well, guess what? You better show some signs of traction throughout this process, and you better explain to your investor what type of traction you're going to be getting them, right? Ideally, it is revenue. But let's just say, no, we're going to do signups, and we've shown that we can increase signups by an extra 10% every month, or 40, 50% month over month, or we're doubling every month, et cetera. And they're going to launch the product, and we're predicting that 10% of them are going to buy, and that's going to make us $10 million as soon as we launch. I don't know what that story is, right? There you have it. So you got to figure out, okay, based on all your projection numbers, then you want to back in. And ideally, you've got a spreadsheet that's going to help you with all that. But you look at your cash flow statement and where you're negative, and you add all that up, and that's how much money you need to raise. It's pretty much how I do it. And, put some away for a rainy day. Hopefully that works. But you don't want to raise way more, because, access to capital. One of my mentors a long time ago, he actually acquired my first startup. He sat me down in his office and he said, Ed, access to too much capital leads to undisciplined decisions. And I said, I totally get it. We had access to no capital and we were very disciplined, but I can see how people in big companies, middle management can just kind of, waste away the money because they're just taking for granted that it sits there. So you don't want to waste too much, but you want to make sure that you've got some flexibility in there and you want to be telling the right financial story. That's how you do your financials. And hopefully that's helpful. I'm sure there's other ways to do it, but that's how I do it when I analyze a startup. And it's pretty much how we approach startups when, they say, oh, we're going to be a unicorn company. And we're looking at them as far as investment doing due diligence, pretty much $100 million by year 5. How many customers they need to have? Do I think they can pull it off? Do they have the numbers, the traction, and all the data to prove it? It's quite simple, very complicated when you get into all the details. If you need help on your projections and you just want a spreadsheet, this is not my good friend Adam Huxema has no idea that I'm doing this, but go to projectionhub.com. This has been fantastic. The single greatest resource I've been sending all the founders that we advise here at startups.com. Go. He's got really great entry-level templates and he's got CPAs, working, raising capital. His background is from, SBA. Okay. He worked in SBA, was a manager there, and he's got a way to coach you and help you challenge your financials and all that stuff by using comparisons and analyzing different sets of data out there. Really fantastic. And the best part is you can get a template that's already built for specific industries, such as two-sided marketplace. Look at that. Acquisition, Airbnb. I don't know about you, but I don't want to build all this stuff from scratch. So you might as well go get a template, and then on top of which you'll customize it for you. Once again, Projection Hub, this is not paid advertising. They do not know that I'm doing this, but I love them so much. I wanted to give them a shout out. If you do reach out to them and you talk to anybody there, say Ed Kang from startups.com sent me, and that would be nice. I don't get anything in return, no affiliate sales or commissions, anything like that. My goal is to just help you as a founder get out there and do these financials and raise that investment. So there you have it. As always, appreciating comments or questions. If you're part of startups.com, make sure you join us for your regular office hours and your cohort meetings. If you're not, check out startups.com. And I always appreciate everybody who we interact with on a regular basis. Let's get to work. Let's do this together. And once again, thanks for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.